Welcome to Literacy Matters Empowered Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Lundy Swift. Today we have two amazing guests, Dr. Denise Donica and Dr. Peter Giroux. Dr. Donica is a professor and chair in the Department of Occupational Therapy at East Carolina University. She is board certified in pediatrics and is certified in AIRS sensory integration. She worked for 8 years in clinical practice, including pediatrics, and currently engages in research focusing on handwriting, keyboarding, and sensory integration. She has 20 publications and over 50 national and international presentations. In addition, she works part-time as a national presenter for Learning Without Tears. Peter Giroux is a professor of occupational therapist at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He has taught at UMMC for 31 years, to include time spent teaching courses in pediatrics, early childhood, middle childhood, and adolescence. He is an active occupational therapist practitioner providing school-based occupational therapy and assistive technology services to students in the Madison County School District for the past 30 years. He has served and continues to serve as a mentor and consultant to occupational practitioners, teachers, and administrators throughout the state in the area of school-based occupational therapy. He has been a presenter for Learning Without Tears, providing workshops and learning sessions on a national and international level for 25 years. He is also a published researcher in the areas of handwriting and keyboarding evaluation and intervention with students of all ages. I want to welcome you to the show, Denise and Peter.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. We're honored to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Of course, of course. So Denise, will you tell us a little bit about you and your work?
Absolutely. I'm an occupational therapist. I have been for almost 25 years now, and I generally work full-time at East Carolina University. I'm a professor there and the department chair for the Department of Occupational Therapy. And I've worked clinically for about 8 years, including pediatrics, working in both outpatient practice as well as school-based practice. But now, currently, most of my work with children has been through research. And so I facilitate research projects with our graduate students here at the program. And then I present and publish research. I have over 20 articles that I have published and have done presentations nationally and internationally. In addition to that, I also work part-time as a presenter for Learning Without Tears.
And Peter, would you please tell us all about you and the work that you do?
Sure. Well, glad to be here. Again, my name is Peter, and I have been an occupational therapist for almost 37 years. And I teach at a university in Mississippi full-time. And I'm fortunate that we are allowed to have a clinical practice. So I'm able to see kids 1 day a week. So for 1 day a week, I have seen children in the Madison County School District, which is just north of Jackson, Mississippi, where my own children went to school. And then they're on there all these years later, still providing those occupational therapy services. And so when I say 1 day a week, sometimes it's 2 half days a week or a couple hours here and there, but it gives me a chance to continue to work with kids on handwriting and keyboarding and basic occupational therapy skills as well. So I have had the pleasure of doing research with Dr. Denise Donica, so that's been a great experience for me. And then again, just continue to see kids and present for Handwriting Without Tears. I've been with them for 25 years, traveled all over the United States, all over the world, and now traveling virtually as well. So thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the work that you do. I love that you're continuing to work with students. And I would love to know what you are seeing currently as it relates to handwriting.
That is a great question. And so you would think that with companies like Learning Without Tears and other companies that have handwriting curriculums, you would think that handwriting would be on the forefront of everybody's agenda in schools. But in reality, it's not. In reality, it's not. It's still considered an afterthought. It's something that schools really feel like the students should already know before they come to school. It is something that I see as a therapist that teachers and professionals think they can demonstrate to a student one time on how to make a letter and that they should remember it that one time. So I often tell teachers, for sure, I say, well, did you teach math facts one time? Did you tell them that 2 + 2 = 4 one time? And they'll say, well, of course I didn't. And I'm like, well, how can you then expect them to make the letter C when you only showed it to them one time? And so what I am seeing as a practitioner is I'm just not seeing that time dedicated to handwriting that we saw many, many years ago. Actually, when I was in school, probably was when we probably did that. So that's sort of what I've seen.
Sure, sure. What about you, Denise?
Yeah, I think great. Peter has a great perspective because he's out in the schools every week working with kids as an OT. My work with children has been more through research, and so I'm seeing some of the same things, not on the level that Peter sees, but teachers that are concerned that they can't read their child's handwriting. And also a lot of times the teachers indicate that they were never really taught handwriting, so it's hard for them to know how to help, nor do they have time to help with handwriting. And I thought it was really interesting. I was talking to my husband the other day. He's an 8th grade science and social studies teacher, and I was asking him about handwriting of the kids that he works with, and he's in a rural public school. And he was talking about how difficult it is to read the students' handwriting that he sees at the 8th grade level. He talks about the legibility being poor. They don't know when and how to use capitals. They can't punctuate. And he intentionally requires students to color as part of their assignments. And they actually have to take notes by hand in this class, even though they have dedicated Chromebooks in the school. And he has found that although the Chromebooks are used more frequently for all of the other classes, that they're a source of distraction for the students. And so he does not use them in his class. And he understands that the research shows that taking notes by hand actually has a better connection to memory than taking notes on a computer. And so he'll talk about the students complaining about their hands hurting or having to write, but he really strives to have the students be involved. And he has noticed that they are much more engaged in note-taking if they're handwriting their notes versus when he first started teaching and they did them on the computer. So I thought that was really interesting to hear that perspective from an older student as well.
Sure. You know, Peter, I want to go back because, you mentioned that you're not seeing handwriting being taught. And I can just tell you that I know a lot of the teachers that I get to speak with, or a lot of the principals who are making schedules and things of that sort, feel like they have so much pressure to cover all of the standards and to make sure that they have a heavy load to lift, right? That they're teaching everything that's being asked of them. And for that matter, they're focused on other things as well. As they have to keep students safe. There are a lot of things to feed children. They just feel like handwriting, they don't have time for it. What do you say to teachers that say, I don't have time for handwriting?
Yeah, that's such a great point because I actually hear that a lot, that teachers tell me that they don't have time to teach handwriting. And then what we're seeing in the schools today is that handwriting instruction is part of that larger English language arts umbrella. And so with the English language arts umbrella, you're going to have a spelling test, which has a grade assigned to it. You're going to have a reading assignment, and they look to see how you read and how you, what is your recall of something that you've read? Can you answer questions about that? And so, but when it comes to basic handwriting, what I don't see in school standards is I do not see a standard that says this student will make 52 letters correctly. They will space appropriately. They will orient the letters to the line. And I feel like this is sort of where our big challenge is, because I've had the pleasure of working with teachers for so many years. And what I know about teachers is if you give them a set of objectives, they will make sure that they meet them. So it's not included in the expectation. They don't have the expectation that we're going to teach these kids how to form these letters correctly. Our expectations say something more along the lines of they will express themselves in writing. They will write a declarative sentence. but it never says it's legible. It never says it's spaced correctly or even spelled correctly. It just says, yeah, they wrote a sentence. So that is what I think is part of our big issue, is that we don't have state objectives that speak specifically to the mechanics of handwriting and letter formation and recall and those types of things.
Sure. How long does it take to teach a handwriting lesson? When you're thinking about a time constraint, you want to tell someone, well, this is about how long it takes. How long does it take?
So, Dr. Donica, I'll start and then you can jump in, right?
Sure.
And so we really feel like at Learning Without Tears, we like to keep handwriting lessons about 10 minutes session dedicated to handwriting. And that's really my tricky part in working with teachers, because they tell me, well, they've been writing all morning. And I said, but you haven't been teaching them how to make letters. They've had a pencil in their hand, but we need 10 minutes of dedicated time. And of my world of working with children that may have different backgrounds and different skills, I often start with my teachers to say, all right, just give me 5 minutes. Because when I tell them 10 minutes, they'll say, oh, I don't have 10 minutes. I said, just give me 5 minutes and see what you can do. Because I have learned that if they start with five, that five becomes six and six becomes seven, because once they see the progress that these kids are making and they finally get to that 10 to 15 minute window. But I sometimes find if I say that up front, they're like, I don't have 10 minutes in my schedule.
I think that the other piece is that consistency of teaching it over time. So once they've learned all the letters, it doesn't mean stop teaching handwriting and we're done for the year, because I think the challenge is that, just like Peter was talking about spelling, you can't expect a child to be writing a word to learn the spelling and be trying to learn the handwriting at the same time. Their brain, you can't learn both at the same time. And so they need to continue that 5 to 10 minutes a day, focusing on those handwriting mechanics in some way throughout the rest of the year, just to reinforce that aspect.
Sure. And Denise, I loved your example of your husband being an eighth grade teacher. I'm a former middle school teacher and principal as well. And so I've got to tell you that I get a lot of questions. What do I do with those older kids who didn't learn how to properly handwrite? What do you do? How do you fix them?
Sure. What I first look at is what the expectations are. Some schools may have a specific expectation in terms of if they're supposed to write in print, if they're supposed to write in cursive. So I look at that first and collect just a basic sample of their writing to see kind of where they are. If it's an older student that has never been taught cursive, a lot of times I will teach them cursive. And I do that because you don't have to have mastered print to learn cursive. But if you are a middle school student and you're struggling with writing, you've been struggling with print a very long time. And a lot of times those kids don't want to work on it anymore. So cursive gives them like a fresh start. And it also is more adult-like. And so they're often more motivated to learn cursive and try to use this new style of writing. It also can be helpful for students. Usually they don't have as many issues with spacing if they're doing cursive, and they're often less likely to reverse letters as well. And so those are things that I think about with an older student in terms of handwriting. But I also want to look at keyboarding, because I do know how important keyboarding is as a life skill as well as an academic skill. And that is another skill that needs to be taught. And so nowadays students are introduced to a computer long before they learn how to keyboard. So you may have a student, an older student, who can't write efficiently and they can't type efficiently either. And so they're struggling to communicate either way. So if we can teach them keyboarding skills, then that may give them another efficient and effective way to communicate that they can be successful with.
Sure. I love that. I love all of what you're saying. It's very practical, right? And when do you decide if you should teach print or cursive?
So print is generally easier for younger students, and it has to do with how we're able to develop the strokes and the developmental sequence that we use with vertical lines and then horizontal lines, circles, and so forth. Usually print is easier to teach up front. And historically, even looking at research, typically cursive has been taught around 9 or 10 years of age. And so that's where a lot of times we introduce it in third grade, sometimes second grade. But that tends to be the point where it is introduced for students to add that skill as well.
Sure. You know what we've been getting from a lot of our listeners? I hear parents and teachers ask about this concept of dysgraphia, where parents are saying the teachers think my kid has dysgraphia, or maybe my student is, or my teachers, or my kid has dyslexia. And so, but I think people don't really know what they really are. What is dysgraphia and what is dyslexia? How are they different? How are they similar?
I think that is a great question. And I think it is really important to understand the similarities and the differences with dysgraphia and dyslexia. They are both actually identified as specific learning disorders, and they both impact academic performance, especially related to literacy. And they may both impact handwriting skills, but you're going to see the impacts differently from dysgraphia to dyslexia. I'm going to describe dyslexia first because I think it is the more common of the two when you hear those terms thrown about. Dyslexia affects reading, language processing, and comprehension. And I think those are the key things with dyslexia to remember. Challenges that we may see because of dyslexia are difficulties with recognizing written words, decoding text, reading both fluently and accurately, spelling, phonemic awareness, and reading comprehension as well. And when we consider a student who has dyslexia, the impacts that we may see on handwriting include spelling challenges. They may be reversing letters, omitting letters, and they may have poor quality in their handwriting because of the extra cognitive load that they need for decoding. It's important to recognize that occasional reversals are not uncommon, even up until the second grade. So just because they're reversing a letter doesn't mean they have dyslexia. Yeah. However, persistent reversals, in addition to these other language and processing issues I just mentioned, could be a concern. Dysgraphia, though, on the other hand, affects the handwriting mechanics and the fine motor skills required for writing. So challenges that we may see because of dysgraphia include difficulty forming letters, spacing within and between words, organizing the writing on the paper, and the overall legibility. So a child who has illegible handwriting doesn't necessarily have dysgraphia because many children have never even been taught how to write letters. So we want to see first how they do with handwriting instruction and how they perform with handwriting before we look at dysgraphia as a possible condition. And it is interesting to recognize that a child may struggle with either dysgraphia or dyslexia, but there are some children that actually have both learning disorders.
So basically, what you're saying is it goes right back to instruction, right? I know that obviously, that structured literacy instruction really supports children with dyslexia, just like those 10 to 15 minutes that Peter was talking about helps children perhaps with dysgraphia, or at least deciding whether or not they might even have dysgraphia. Thank you for explaining that to us, Denise. So you guys have mentioned the word mechanics a couple of times. Peter, could you tell me what exactly are the mechanics of handwriting and how can we help children develop those mechanics?
Sure. So really, when we start looking at what we call the mechanics of handwriting, it's very, very basic that from the beginning that people want to overlook things like having the student sitting at an appropriate sized desk with feet on the floor with a desk that's at the appropriate height. And so now we have this, what do my teachers call it? Flexible seating. We have all this flexible seating in the classroom with a little bouncy chair or a little wobble stool or a beanbag chair. And those are fabulous for listening, for if somebody's reading a story to you and you have some movement, but those are not good places to write letters for the first time. So I always remind teachers that feet on the floor, desk the appropriate height, and then we look at actually pencil grip. Now, research is very, very wide open on grip. And again, as a university professor, I see students, my college students, that have just about the worst grips on the planet.
Wow.
It's just, and it lets me know what they were being taught in school, and what they were not being taught was the mechanics of handwriting. Now these folks are they're in graduate school. I teach graduate students, and they are not holding a pencil correctly. Does this mean that they can't write legibly? Not necessarily. However, if you have a child that has a poor grip, you have to address that to make sure that that isn't getting in the way of what we call legibility, being able to write neatly. So that breaks down even in some more components as far as the placement, what we refer to as placement on the line. And what we refer to as the size of their handwriting. And then what we also refer to as spacing between letters and spacing between words. And this all falls into that mechanics of handwriting that we have to teach. And I can't believe I haven't said it already. I haven't said this. One of the things I see over and over and over again, and I know all of us, probably everybody listening, is that these kids don't know handwriting because they are self-taught. They are self-taught. Somebody wants them to excel and get accepted to I'm going to make up a word, the ABC University Preschool. And in order to get accepted to the ABC University Preschool, you have to be able to write your name at 3 years of age. And that's just an example. And so what we see parents and teachers and tutors putting writing utensils in the hands of children and trying to get them to write their name. Now, I don't know what the listeners, if you figured this out, but I'm from Mississippi, the land of double names. Catherine Elizabeth, John Robert, Mary Margaret. That's a lot of letters for a 3 and 4-year-old child to try to master. And so I teach that to my teachers really, really early, that, we're going to use initials, we're going to use starting letters, we're going to focus on one letter at a time and not try to master Catherine Elizabeth when they are 4 or 5 years old.
Sure.
So.
Well, when I was in kindergarten, we didn't have pre-K back when I was in kindergarten, so I never went to pre-K. But my mom was great at helping me to learn to write. But I had very weak hands. I have these small hands. My husband calls me Pringles because I can stick my whole hand into a can of Pringles. It's a superpower, and pull out a whole stack of Pringles. But I remember getting an occupational therapist when I was at Southside Elementary School. And I remember doing all these cool things to help build my fine motor strength. What are some things that we can share with families and teachers to really help children who have low tone, who really don't have a lot of strength in their fingers, to actually hold a pencil correctly? Because I remember when I was given a different grip and it feeling like a miracle that I could now write without having any pain.
So, I guess I'll start, and then Dr. Donica, you can jump in, because this is, as an occupational therapist, this is something that's very important to us, not only for our profession of occupational therapy, but for the educational model, is for people to understand the importance of muscle strength. So I will say, as an occupational therapist, when we started having more screens in the classroom, specifically iPads, I really, as an occupational therapist, I thought that iPad would produce advanced eye-hand coordination and more selective control. And I actually did think that it might produce some finger isolation and some strengthening. And Dr. Donica, you can jump in. I haven't seen any of that. In fact, it's worse because the iPad is so easy to use. You don't have to be precise. you just slide and do something. And I joke with my teachers and parents all the time of those screens on an iPad or even our phone. Oops, I just purchased something. I didn't mean to do that. Because it's so easy to make those movements. And so what we need to see in the classroom is what we used to see in the classroom. We need to see the kitchen center. We need to see the painting center. We need to see the fine motor center that has either Legos in it, because kids love Legos these days, or other objects that are small that require those relationships of above and below and beside and next to and touching and connected. And also, we need to see a return of the playground. We need people climbing bars. We need people swinging. We need running to develop those large muscle skills. In addition, occupational therapy terms, those vestibular skills where we're connecting the position of our head to the rest of our body. So I'll let you go, Dr. Donica.
Sure, thanks. I think that the other piece that Dr. Giroux was alluding to with the hand strength, not only the constructional things that he was talking about, but the pinching and the squeezing and the twisting and the turning and all of those kinds of things that we don't see those in our digital toys and our digital tools. And so any way that at home for families, at school for teachers, having those materials that children have to interact with that are real life materials, the twisting, the turning, the pinching, the squeezing, the dough, Play-Doh, we use that a lot and we hear, probably Peter and I both have heard teachers talk about how weak children's hands are now when they enter school, preschool, kindergarten, whatever level it is. They don't get those strengthening opportunities. And some of it is because of not having the fine motor activities we were just speaking of. And some of it's the playground, not having as much time outside building those skills that way. So anything that they can do, there's lots of ways, even just to Google online, fine motor activities. What can I do in my home with things that I already have? And another piece that kind of relates to handwriting, but isn't directly, is scissor skills. That's a coordination skill that we are so afraid to have a child with a pair of scissors, and we don't want to leave a child alone with a pair of scissors, but we need to teach them how to use them, and that requires supervision. Yeah. But that strength and coordination to use both hands together to hold the piece of paper and cut with the other hand, that's another fine motor skill that's really important that will also translate to handwriting.
Sure. I really remember doing things with, again, like you mentioned, Play-Doh, but paper bag clips are really great. Tongs, turkey bases, all of those things are really great to build strength, which is it just, again, things that people have at home, right? Opening and closing doors, and back in the day, turning those TV knobs, those kinds of things were really, really important. Thank you for that. And those are things that parents can do at home, and teachers can certainly include as well. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that we also link, because Learning Without Tears has a list of things that families can do. So we'll make sure that we link those as well into this episode. Now, I had a chance to interview Dr. Carolyn Strom, and she was a phenomenal guest. And she actually has, really set apart the fact that handwriting is a part of the science of reading, really helping children to learn to read. Handwriting is a component. She calls it the handwriting hub. But one of the things that she said that really stuck out to me is that handwriting is not just penmanship. I'd love for you to tell me what you think she means by that and how we could use that in our daily work, either as family members or teachers or even school leaders.
Absolutely. I think she is absolutely right with her statement that handwriting is not just penmanship. And I would definitely encourage the viewers to watch that session if you didn't see it already, because she has a lot of critical information in there. To me, penmanship is more the art of what handwriting looks like. handwriting involves so many more things than just that appearance. And Dr. Strom talks about how critical the link between handwriting and reading is. There are actually neurological links between the two. And we so much hear about the focus of reading and how critical reading is, and it is. But handwriting itself can help a student be successful with reading. This is very important to understand these connections when considering how students learn. And then in addition to that, there's even more to handwriting than just this link to reading. Handwriting also requires sensory integration. It requires visual perception. That's an important component. Praxis and motor planning, tactile discrimination. Those things are all important to make handwriting successful. So I think penmanship is just a very narrow focus of what handwriting really encompasses.
Sure. So I'm going to tell you, I know some of our listeners are like, okay, you don't have to sell me anymore. I get it. I will teach handwriting. I will find the 10 minutes in my day. But where do we start? Where do we tell them to start?
I think for school leaders that are watching, I think the starting point is deciding on a structured curriculum that you'll use with fidelity. Teachers will likely need to be trained in that curriculum, and research shows that many teachers, as I mentioned before, aren't taught how to teach handwriting. So coming up with what is that structure that you're going to use in your school and or district, and help giving the teachers the tools to be successful with that. For families, I would suggest first communicating with the teacher, if there's a classroom teacher, if you're not homeschooling them, and find out what they are doing in the classroom, what the expectations are in the classroom, so that you can do things to complement and support what's being taught in the classroom. And then for teachers, you are that front line. You are the ones that can really make that difference day to day in that classroom setting. And so I really think focusing on those mechanics that Dr. Giroux talked about before, the posture, where are they sitting? What does their body look like? Their grip, how are they holding a pencil or a crayon or the writing tool that they're using at the time? And then looking at a writing sample to figure out where are the child's strengths that you can build on, and where are some of those struggles that they're having, to kind of figure out where to start. And I'd always encourage you to reach out to an occupational therapist too, who can help give you some tips on that order once you get to that point.
Sure. I love that. What I have found to be really inspiring is that each of you, although being occupational therapists, have had some connection to reading. You in just your responses have indicated that they're connected. So I'd love for you to tell me what you think when it comes to handwriting and how it connects to the science of reading and maybe even to the science of writing. Denise, can you tell me anything about that?
Sure. I think when we are considering the science of writing, I think it may be easier to think about writing in the context of the writing rope. And you may or may not have seen this, but I'll explain it a little bit to you. Given this concept, writing is the integration of two different concepts, composition and transcription. So composition is what we think about when a student has to generate those ideas to form thoughts, especially in response to a writing prompt, is a good example of thinking about the composition. It includes the vocabulary selected, the consideration of the reader of the work and what the purpose of that writing is for, the knowledge of the structure types, and the knowledge of the text structure, and of course, grammar in terms of that writing sample. All of these components are important to create logical thoughts in writing. So composition in that writing rope complements, if you're familiar with Scarborough's reading rope, it complements the language comprehension aspect of that reading rope, which is derived from the science of reading research. The other concept in the writing rope is transcription. So this is where handwriting is a critical component. So transcription involves all of those skills that work together to allow a child to spell. So they must be able to recognize the letters as part of this component. It also looks at punctuation and in terms of the handwriting piece. And they also must be fluent and legible with their handwriting specifically. So the whole rope unravels if that handwriting piece falls apart. So this transcription component of the writing rope complements the word recognition aspect of the reading rope. Therefore, the science of reading and the science of writing are intimately intertwined.
I love that. That's a really comprehensive response. I want to thank you for that. So I have thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. And, this is, literacy matters, empowered conversations. The idea is to empower families, teachers, and school leaders with what is shared here. I'd love for you to share with families, teachers, and school leaders something to empower them as it relates to handwriting.
Sure, I'll start with that. And I think because Dr. Giroux and I are both occupational therapists, we really think it's important that we leave all of you with the knowledge of handwriting. Teaching handwriting is easy. There are a lot of strategies to help children be successful. But if those strategies don't work for you, there are resources that you can reach out to. And occupational therapy is the perfect profession to collaborate with you to work with those students. Although many aspects of handwriting can be addressed by teachers having the knowledge of how to teach it and the tricks and strategies to help students improve, for some children, that's just not enough. For example, the article that I mentioned earlier that I had published discusses the relationship of handwriting skills and praxis, which is the conceptualization, the planning, and the execution of a motor act. So some children may be struggling with praxis and it's showing up as a handwriting difficulty. And just teaching them handwriting is not going to necessarily help them be a legible writer. And it may require the intervention of an occupational therapist. So it's important to understand that there are other professionals to reach out to when students may have those underlying issues that are affecting their handwriting instruction. So don't feel like you are alone in helping these students communicate effectively and legibly.
I love that, Denise, because essentially what you're saying is that teachers can teach children how to handwrite, and occupational therapists are not the handwriting people, right? You're helping
Right.
children with more complex issues. So, Peter, what will you leave our teachers, school leaders, and families with?
So there are a couple of things I want to point out. First off is I know we were talking about handwriting, and that's our point here. But this conversation here is literacy matters, and they're connected. And I think the biggest message that I share with my teachers is that reading and writing, yes, they're both part of literacy, but they progress at different speeds. And I think that's the part that I really would like teachers to take away. So when you think of a small child, you think of a toddler. I'm in a new world of grandchildren now. I have a grandchild, and she can say dog. So she has that language. She understands language. If I read a story about the dog, she actually will go and find the dog that's in my house, So that language, but she's 18 months old. She's nowhere ready to write the letters, D-O-G. And even if she did, she wouldn't know what they meant. And so I think that's the part that I like to remind my teachers that it's like a railroad track, that language and literacy, language and literacy and handwriting, if we will, are headed in the same direction, but they're not progressing at the same speed. And so I just always, so my takeaway for these parents, and I definitely agree with everything Dr. Donica said about, yes, handwriting is easy, but if there are problems, sometimes it's hard to figure out what the problem is. Is it vision? Is it fine motor? Is it muscle strength? Is it lack of experience, lack of opportunity? And so you definitely want to pull in those key people, being your teachers or your occupational therapist or reading specialist or dyslexia specialist, if that's something that you have access to. So I have to jump on the fact that she said that we need to tap into those other resources, because as a teacher, they feel they have to have the answer to everything. I think sometimes they are timid to ask for help because someone will think, oh, they don't know. And so the university professor in me says, no, you ask for help, because that's the only way that you gain skills, is by learning from other people. And so, and this is a little off track, Dr. Swift, and you can edit this out if you decide to. My latest thing when I'm sharing with teachers about language and literacy and handwriting, and again, as a university professor, I work with students and they want everything simplified. They want to know just the basics. So I'm giving you my simplified version. I haven't researched it. It's not published. Maybe it should be one day. But if we have a word in front of us, and we'll go back to the word dog. So if we have that word, I see it with my eyes, it travels back to my brain, and I form it, and it comes out my mouth, and I say the word dog. And I've been saying this to my college students too. So that pathway is very short, here to here, and it comes right out. But when I ask them to write the word dog, I have to see it with my eyes. It has to travel to my brain. It has to go all the way down my spine. It has to go all the way out my arms to the very tips of my fingers. And then I have to write those 3 letters. And my teachers usually say, I got it now. I got it. I see what you're saying, that it is going to be slower. And it's not the best analogy, but I think it's an analogy that teachers can understand. So when they are frustrated, why is my reader not writing? And so I say that it's because it's a different skill. It's that pure motor. Writing is pure motor. Yes, it's vision. Yes, it's perception, but it's coming out the muscles of the hand. So again, you can edit that out if you want, but I just
that's not going to get edited out, Peter. I just want you to know that I love that. That means so much to me. I can totally see that, and I am going to steal that. By the way,
you can have it, and then I will get Dr. Denise Donica and Dr. Cheryl Lundy Swift, and we'll publish it and make it something that someone can take away.
Of course.
And we'll put some science with it too, and some nerve conduction studies and those types of things. So
of course.
It's a really big study.
Well, I certainly appreciate you guys' just your expertise and your passion. Thank you for sharing with us. And happy National Handwriting Day, which is coming up.
Yes, I always love to close with happy handwriting. So happy handwriting.
Happy handwriting.